all the questions we have from LBB. So, Brian, welcome. And
Thank you. Afternoon, Madam Chair. Can you hear me okay? Thank you for having me this afternoon, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, members. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I also want to recognize we have our board chair, Mr. Eric Nichols, in the audience, as well as a board member, Nate Sprinkle, who are in the audience as well. Appreciate them being here today. I'm going to go through our exceptional items for you very briefly, but I want to first just give you just a quick snapshot of where the agency is. You heard from LBB, but right now the population, Senator Kokor's, is 135,835. That's where we are right now. It's projected to go to about 137 by the end of this calendar year. So we have plans to make sure that we have room for that, but 137 roughly by the end of the year. This time a year ago, we were 132, just to give you a kind of a ballpark in the growth. And also within that population, that over 55, and I don't believe that's old, promise you, but at the same time, we track that because their medical age can be considered older than their chronologic age. That has gone up 30%, 34% in the last 10 years. The number that I really want you to pay attention to is the mental health number. So in the last 10 years, that number's increased 50%. We have 37,000 inmates in the system today that are diagnosed with mental health needs, where back when we had 140,000 inmates, we had about 27,000. So those are some of the dynamics we see within the population that we have, as well as becoming more of a violent population. If you look down in the presentation material that I have, I'm going to kind of walk through real quickly this sheet. But on our parole population, it has remained basically stable. If you go to probation, you do see increases in adult probation in the felony side this past year, and they're projected to go up another 6,000 over the course of the calendar year. So they have seen increases in adult probation, mostly in the felony populations, as the LVB indicated. Beginning on slide 2, I'm going to run through our exceptional item request very quickly. The first one would be for probation, and it would provide a 10% pay raise for probation officers. It would also extend misdemeanor funding, which currently only funds through 180 days, to 12 months. It would also provide $46.4 million to continue residential and outpatient treatment that's already in place, the increased cost of those services. Item number 2 would be training and retention initiatives for the agency. It would allow us to move from a 6-week training academy to an 8-week academy with 50 new training sergeants. It would also allow us to buy employee uniforms to raise the bar of professionalism with our correctional officers with a much better looking uniform, much like law enforcement have today. It would also provide for employee support services to respond to staff during the times or after critical incidents occur. We started doing this in the last 4 to 5 years with grant funds, and we have found we have a true pent-up demand because we deal with a lot of hazardous events, and staff are significantly impacted by that. But to help our retention, we would want to work on that. Item 3 is the Texas Correctional Office on Offenders with Medical or Mental Impairments, or the longest acronym in government, TACUMI. And that is funds that we provide to local MHMRs for services for probation and parolees and continuity of care. There's about 50,000 people a year that get services through those contracts with local MHMRs. Part of this funding would continue those contracts at the increased cost of those contracts. The other part, $6 million, would basically put 180 new dual diagnosis beds for probation out there in the community, where we would have substance use mental health beds in a residential setting that we could put out in the community. The next slide is the correctional managed health care. And I'm going to quickly go through that item. It would cover maintaining current operations because they weren't fully funded in the last biennium, hospital Galveston renovation, employee retention and workforce development, as well as market adjustments, new positions for dental, pharmacy, and mental health, capital equipment to replace equipment on the units as well as in the hospital. And it would also allow us to convert the Bell unit, which is a unit in Cleveland, Texas, we would like to convert that unit to an outpatient mental health facility, and this would pay for 18 mental health staff to work at that location. On the next page, number 5 would be targeted salary adjustments for administrative staff at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. We've identified post-COVID that in our attorneys, engineers, all of our administrative positions, we are 17% below the average state agency. This amount of funding would close that gap by half. Would certainly not fix it, but it would close the gap by half. But we've lost a lot of employees to other agencies and state government, and this would hopefully help us address that. 6 is unit maintenance, the cost of doing day-to-day repairs on our unit, which continues to increase. 7 is capital equipment. That's everything from holsters, ballistic vests, all the way to washers and dryers and things on our units and our warehouses. The number 8 is a dormitory that we would like to build in Amarillo, Texas. It's an 80-person dorm. We have the Clements unit in Amarillo, which is a 3,000-bed facility, and right now it's about 40% staffed. We send staff from all over the state to Amarillo every week and every day to augment the staffing at that facility because we need to operate that unit. It also has a 1,700-bed empty unit right next door. We would hope the dorm would allow us to bring people to move into that area at a low-cost or no-cost housing to be able to staff the second unit and open that second unit. If that did not bring them to live in Amarillo, then we could use it to offset the cost we're paying right now for hotels in Amarillo. We're paying about $1 million a year in hotel cost in Amarillo to put staff there to continue to run those units. If you go to number 9, it would be putting information technology staff out on our prisons. We do not have IT staff on our units. We put 74 IT staff in the field who can respond to IT issues with camera systems and all the other things that we have on our units today. 10 would be an item you've seen before. We had a corrections program or project to actually replace our old mainframe computer. You funded in 21 with $24 million to replace the prison side of our business. We contracted with a vendor. That vendor moved us from the from the servers to a cloud, but was unable to continue to be able to deliver the actual project. We stopped the project rather than come forward and ask for additional funding with that vendor to continue the project. We have a third-party vendor we have had along with that project, Gartner, who has helped us along the way with managing the other project. They've identified there are about a half a dozen systems around the country already built that they believe could do our corrections and our community corrections piece. They would have to be modified, but you could buy it off the shelf with modification. This amount would cover the cost of that. We have $7 million left over from the project we had before that potentially could be utilized as well. 11 is for software packages that augment CAPS. We're implementing CAPS right now, but there are pieces of functionality we have in the agency that CAPS does not cover. This would provide the software for those pieces. Item 12 would be a information management system for our Office of Inspector General. They open 6,500 criminal cases a year. This would be the system that allows them to track that work. 13 is a telephone system upgrade for prison units. We have old school coax phone lines, the old switch type phone systems. There's no longer support for those type phone systems in the U.S. So our final vendor that we had, NEC, has left the U.S. So right now, to move those to fiber optic, this funding would do half of the units that we have right now. It would let us move them to fiber optic, the current technology, to be able to continue to support those phone networks. 14 is broadband connectivity. We got a COVID grant that allowed us to bring broadband to the unit, but this pushes broadband back into the unit. So education, medical, all the other areas of the unit. And Madam Chair, one of the initiatives that we've had this past year from our board was to do Zoom hearings to replace bench warrants. We did 1,000 last year, which is awesome. And that continues to increase as courts become more and more aware of it. But that broadband issue is such that you have many times to turn off other things on the unit to run the Zoom hearing. So this would allow us to push the fiber through the unit so that you can move the internet speed. 15 is video surveillance equipment on the smaller prisons in Texas. We have smaller video units. Most are analog. This would allow us to update to digital. 16 and 17 are a little tied together. You gave us funding last session for body cameras for the maximum security units. We're on our 15th unit on the rollout of those 23 units now. It's a great enhancement for safety, but also to help have a better environment inside the facility. We would like to do that statewide. And if we were successful in obtaining the funding for that, we would also like to equip our sergeants with tasers. That's the last item, number 17. That's what that means, is a taser. We've identified with the body camera system that we have lieutenants with tasers now. It de-escalates way more than as the taser ever has to be used. Many times when they show up with a taser, it de-escalates the situation, and we don't have to put our hands on an inmate. And Madam Chair, that concludes my testimony.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple of questions about how, because, we've received information that, of course, the population is growing. So do you want to briefly kind of discuss your plans to
Yes,
how
ma'am.
TDCJ is going to approach that,
Certainly.
expand capacity to
Yes, ma'am.
take care of the population?
So a couple of things in motion that we've worked on over the last couple of years. So one, we've actually opened a couple of units. We opened one in Beeville this past year, the Garza unit. You've put funding in the budget for us to continue to operate that. We had also opened the Bartlett unit in Bartlett, Texas. We opened that in October. It's not completely full, but will be. And we're poised to open the Gurney unit in Palestine. That's a 2,000-bed facility. We're poised to open that. We're just monitoring population right now. We don't have to open that. We also went inside of our existing facilities. So when we moved inmates to what we call cool beds, we used to have a restrictive housing population, or ADSEG, of about 9,000 inmates. They were single cell. and many of the cells that they were in on the newer prisons were air conditioned. That population today is about 3,000. So we went in and looked at a lot of those cells that we had that were originally for one individual and went through the process to add bunks to many of those cells, which gave us another 1,200 beds. So we have capacity that will pull you through the next year and up into the next year after. In addition, in our base request, you funded for us to be able to provide expansion dormitories. We asked for funding, it's a little over $300 million, but that would give you 5,600 beds for expansion dorms that we could actually co-locate next to prisons that we fully staff. Right now we have beds, even in the system as we speak, we have nearly 5,000 empty beds on the units we operate. We also have about another 5,000 on beds that we don't operate. We just don't have the staff to operate all those beds. And because of the locations, it's not necessarily, they're not in areas that are conducive to the staffing. So we send staff, we do lots of other strategies to keep beds running. But the dormitories, which would really not come online until about 27, that gives you flexibility as you get into the 27, 28 windows. So you would have those located next to a unit in a metro area like El Paso, in the Valley. You'd have them in Dallas and Houston areas where you can fully staff, and you wouldn't be concerned about staffing those. So that will give you somewhat of a relief as you go further into the 27, 28, 29 window. Beyond that, if the population continues to climb, I would say in the 27 cycle, it would be time to probably seriously think about locating a facility in a major metropolitan area that could be staffed, unless things change and we find success in staffing in the West Texas areas. But right now, that still remains a difficulty.
But we're good for this biennium,
Yes, ma'am.
upcoming biennium, but we'll be standing by to hear what the report is in 27.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. My other question, and was something I want to point out because it doesn't really pop up in the budget, but because we put it in the supplemental funding, but there's $214 million for major repair and renovation projects that you
Yes, ma'am.
requested. So that is a special item that we did fund just in that we plan to fund it through the supplemental because it is a one-time cost. And it's a sensitive subject, comes up a lot, heat mitigation in the prisons. My understanding that as you bring these new facilities online, the dorms and stuff, those are all going to be heat mitigated.
Yes,
is that
ma'am.
correct? And then some of this money that we gave you, actually last session, which was, I don't remember exactly what we gave you, but it's close to a
85.
couple of $100 million, wasn't it?
It was
It was.
85 specific for AC.
Yeah.
Yes,
Now
ma'am.
we're giving you another couple of $100 million. Those are for mitigation projects and repair, but a lot of that ends up, as you repair these facilities, you incorporate heat mitigation.
Yes,
Is that
ma'am.
correct?
Absolutely. And if I can run through it real quick, but
Please do, yeah.
I'm very remiss
People
in
have
one thing I failed to say right up front.
Yeah.
Because I meant to start with this, and that was just to say thank you. The funding you gave us last session was tremendous for our agency and really moved us ahead. I said a decade. And what you've also done in the base is phenomenal. So please not let me leave here today without making sure you know how grateful we are for what you've done, because that will help our agency substantially already. What you have done, though, in the area of looking at how we mitigate heat, we have a protocol where inmates with heat need, basically if they have any vulnerability to heat, they're placed in air conditioning. But we have taken small bites, and in the last couple of sessions, big bites at making moves to increase more of the system with air conditioning. We have, with the funding we got last session, with those projects, they're in motion now. They're not completely done, but we will have about 62,000 beds under air conditioning when we finish the projects that you funded last session with the $85 million and the funding that we had in the previous sessions. If you add that with what is in the base, that carries you another 11 to 14,000 beds further, and that puts you up into around the 75,000 mark. The 5,600 beds that we talked about are also air-conditioned beds, and that puts you up over 80 when you look at that, as well as when you look at the beds that we've added. When I added that other cell in those, many of those beds that we had that we converted in a system, those added air conditioning beds to the system as well, because it now puts 2 in a cell that can house 2 with air conditioning. So that puts you in the 80s, well over half the system at that point. You have air conditioning. So as we continue, we made great progress with that. And again, that allows us to have inmates that need to be in air conditioned housing in that type housing, but also as a benefit for our staff that work on those facilities.
Great. Thanks for that update.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, we have some lights, and I was looking at you and talking. I have no idea what order this is in, so I'm just going to go down the row. Senator Zaffarani.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sir, I didn't hear you say anything about educational programs. Did I miss it, or did you not talk about educational programs?
No, ma'am. The Wyndham School District does all of our educational programs, and they actually come in through a different budget item, so they're not on Article 5.
All right, so
They
we'll
come
cover that
in,
at
but
that time.
the Wyndham School District is in place for all of our education, and then they also work and coordinate the college programs that we do.
Thank you. From your perspective,
Yes, ma'am.
could you tell us the impact of our educational and rehabilitation and mental health programs on your population?
One word would be huge, but I need to give you more of an explanation than that. So every piece of education an inmate completes, whether it's I wasn't able to read and now I can, whether it's I was 9th grade and now I'm 11th grade, or whether I got my GED or whether I now have a vocational, every piece of that and everything we've ever looked at shows a reduction in recidivism. So to me, it's one core to making those changes. People have to make a change many different ways. Sometimes education is a component of that. Sometimes it's substance use or other treatment as well, or even mental health treatment. But the education piece is one that pays huge dividends in the employability of those individuals when they get out. And we find more and more employers today that are lining up to take people that come out of prison that used to not ever consider taking those individuals as hires, where now they're willing to consider hiring it, and the vocational training they get through the Wyndham School District as well as our college programs makes a huge difference in their employability when they get out. So to me, it's vital to the overall success. And according to the latest LBB statistic, the recidivism results are between 16 and 17% right now, which is phenomenal.
17%?
Yes, ma'am.
That's my next question, so thank you. What is the economic impact of reducing the recidivism?
Hard to measure from so many different ways. When they don't come back, so to me, public safety is really achieved if they don't come back. That's ultimate public safety. You can say locking them up is public safety, but in reality, if they don't come back in prison, that's true public safety in my opinion. And the cost savings there can't be just measured with a bed, but it has to be measured with there's no crime, there's no victim, all the other components of it have. So I apologize not to be able to give you a number, but I would say it's substantial, but also covers many different components of society.
Thank you. What are the primary driving factors for the projected increase in the population? Is it sentencing practices, parole decisions, changes in crime rates? What?
I think so we saw COVID, we saw the population drop significantly as the court slowed down. We saw that pick back up, and I think essentially have caught up. I think what you're seeing now is more of a leveling of the system. We were 142,000 before COVID hit, and we went down to 116 during COVID, and we're now coming back up at 135, so we're not where we were pre-COVID, but I think you're getting more people on probation, which is good, that are not coming in the system, but we're seeing more inmates with violent convictions coming in the system than we did 10 years ago, and we're seeing obviously more with mental health issues than we did 10 years ago as well.
In your opinion, what is the single most important thing this committee could recommend to our colleagues in the Senate to reduce recidivism?
Through your education and cognitive intervention programs, which you do through Wyndham, and keeping a safe and secure prison. Safe prisons is the baseline of, you got to have a safe facility, bottom line, for staff and inmates. It has to be a safe environment for anything good to happen from there. Right. And then focusing on all the other robust things that we do in the system, education being key, cognitive being key, where you're trying to help them learn how to think at things differently and look at problems differently. Those are key components of what Wyndham does, but also all the work of our 28,000 volunteers and all the faith work that we do with churches and other groups that come in the system and help change them as well.
What programs do you have in place to ensure the safety of the people who work in the prisons and to prevent escapes?
Yes, ma'am. We have a wide variety. You have funded significant improvements in our overall security with comprehensive video surveillance on our maximum security units, and that's where most of our critical incidents occur. You've also funded body camera or body wave millimeter machines last session that we have an RFP out now securing those. We also have x-ray scanners that we can use for our inmate population to better help us see things we need to see within the inmate population. We have staff support services that we started a few years ago to help respond to our staff and help staff when they have critical incidents. We have suicides, we have homicides, we have other critical incidents in prison, and we have staff that deal with that need help and assistance when that occurs to be able to help them cope with what they've just had to deal with. We're now doing that. We're asking for funding to helpfully do that more, but at the same time trying to provide a robust way to give them a well-staffed workforce, but at the same time, part of that back to retention ties on how well we're taking care of those employees. We're also working with our leadership, monitoring our wardens' retention rates specifically, their disciplinary rates, their grievance rates, and looking at all of that firsthand to myself.
Thank you so much. Your predecessors have told us in the past that The most important thing for the prisoners and for their rehabilitation and for reducing recidivism is to have the prisons located in such places that the families can visit regularly. Are your prisons today located geographically, strategically, so that families can visit?
To some degree, but here's the caveat I want to make sure I tell you. Even though there may be a prison next to family, that may not be where their loved one may be. We try to accommodate that, but depending on what the situation is with that individual, the medical needs, the education needs, and the other needs, they may not be housed next to them. We've done a lot. We've created video visitation and lots of other things to try to encourage family connectivity, because you're right, it's key. Having that family that is wanting to be involved in that individual's life once they're in prison is key as well. We also have an inmate tablet program where they're allowed to maintain very close contact with their family members as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Flores.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director Collier, just one question.
Yes, sir.
So, can you explain the planning and goals behind the creation of the innovation program? That's something that you,
Yes,
in
sir.
criminal justice, reduce recidivism and education, something what Senator Zaffarini's talking about, and the one you have is specifically at the Bartlett unit.
Yes, sir.
And give us some details about that program and whether there are plans to expand it. So can you tell the committee about that program?
Surely will, and thank you for the question. So the Bartlett unit, we closed that facility in 2017. It was being run by a private vendor at that time, and we needed to reduce bed use at that time, so we closed the unit. Our research team came to me about 2 years ago and suggested the concept of an innovation unit. Businesses have innovation restaurants, use innovation restaurants where they try new things, different approaches at doing business. So what our team looked at was, could we create a prism where we do all programming? Everyone there is purpose-driven, so you're there for a specific purpose. You're on a program. You're basically focused toward reentry. You're going to get out. And how can we create a facility that would be where we try new programs? We have the staff that are actually flexible and used to that. So we came up with a concept as we're adding beds. We thought, why can't we add an innovation unit? Normally we could add another prison, but we can always add another prison. Why can't we add a prison and put a theme with it and try to do it differently? So we created the innovation unit at Bartlett, and we opened that unit in October. Every inmate there is there for a specific program. There's there's vocational programs. There will be a Highline program there for vocational training. There's a program where we're teaching dog grooming. We're also working with the dog shelter there to bring dogs to the unit where we can actually house break those dogs and have them where they can be adopted. There's other vocational programs that Wyndham is doing and educational programs. Our reentry staff are heavily involved in the unit. And we hired a warden and we brought her from another facility, but gave her the latitude to help build that culture at that unit. And she's done a phenomenal job, to the point of the first release that we had from the unit. They had a video of it, and he's getting released in a suit. That we're donating suits, so if you have suits you want to donate, I'll pick them up, and we're taking them there. But he got out in a suit. He rang the bell like a cancer patient would ring the bell, and the population was out in the yard to watch him go home. That's the environment that they have at Bartlett, and it's just continuing to grow. And we're learning from that to be able to try to look at where we have space, where we can, for those inmates that want to do well and want to do right, we want to offer that environment for them and try to make that as best of environment as we can. And many of our wardens are doing that. We have what we call incentive housing on many of our facilities where wardens have created space that is very favorable. The inmates love it. They behave completely. The staff love it because it's much better work environment, and inmates want to be in that type of housing. We also have inmates that don't want any part of that, and we have to deal with because they have issues, and we can deal with that population too. But it's really trying to provide that type of housing that would encourage them, but also it helps our staff. Frankly, the staff like working at Bartlett. They want to be at that unit. They want to work at that unit. There's a different uniform, a different feel, a different way of doing the business, and I think it changes the way we do our business overall.
Thank you, Director. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Hinojosa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Your needs are many. You have many challenges.
Yes, sir.
But I try to just limit myself to two issues. One of them has to do with staffing.
Yes, sir.
It's been a challenge now for years. So is that because of pay or because of location of the facilities?
So in the last, if you go back to 2022, you have given a 31% pay increase to correctional officers, and additional is coming. So you've done a phenomenal job of increasing the pay. So I won't tell you that it is money. I will tell you money's a factor, a legitimate factor. When we did the 15% pay increase in 22 that was out of cycle, that's the first bump we got in our employment numbers actually improving for the first time. And our retention numbers are the real issue. It's keeping staff. And our retention numbers have been improving, and they have continued to improve every month for the last 2 years. But geographic is huge. West Texas, there are parts of West Texas where Amarillo, for example, Amarillo is a big town, but Amarillo has a very low unemployment rate. It's a very competitive employment market, and we cannot hire enough staff in Amarillo to operate the one facility. We hope the dorm will help, but at least it would help us offset the hotel cost. Fort Stockton, Texas. We hire people in El Paso who weekly go to Fort Stockton to help offset that staffing. We don't like those models, but that's what we do to make it work. But in reality, the geography has a lot to do with it. We can staff in Edinburgh, as you know. We can staff in Houston. We can staff in Dallas. We can staff in San Antonio. There's parts of Northeast Texas, New Boston, we struggle. Palestine, somewhat we struggle. Huntsville, we do fair. But there's just a tough market based on where we're located.
Well, it seems to me that the $1 million a month is not sustainable because you're moving staff from other units that leaves them understaffed.
Yes, sir.
So it's an issue. The staffing problem really needs to be addressed. I'm not sure what the answer is because I don't have an answer, but it's just several. It seems like there's several factors involved in the staffing shortage. Obviously,
Yes,
we have an issue with trying to compete with the private sector, but at the same time, having uniforms, trying to make the inmates, making the whole staff more professional.
Yes, sir.
Better uniforms and better training
Yes, sir.
is an answer, or at least part of the answer, besides pay. The other issue is that we have prisoners and inmates that are gang members that actually run the gang from inside the prison.
Yes, sir.
And we have had that challenge for a while, and contraband coming in, drugs and cell phones. But one of the, I guess, tools that you've been using is recordings of telephone conversations. Tell us about that technology that you have now in place.
Yes, sir.
Not in all of TDCJ, but only in some areas, I understand.
Yes, sir. So contraband's a huge issue, and it has continued to be an issue and a struggle for us. COVID, it really ballooned, but at the same time, the sophistication of the networks outside. We have drone drops regularly on prisons where they're dropping drugs into prisons. We find major drug finds to include sometimes significant amounts of fentanyl in the narcotics that we find on our facilities or being dropped near our facilities. Our Inspector General's office works closely around the state, but they have busted drone operations where they've got liquid fentanyl, they've got the printing presses, they've got everything to do magazines and other things that come through the mailroom. We eliminated regular mail, so we do electronic for most inmate mail, but magazines and books still come in legal mail. We get fake legal mail all the time that looks like a typical attorney letter, but it's actually someone has made stationery to do this. So it's a big issue. One of the tools we use is Leo's technology, Virus, that actually goes in and you can listen for specific information on any phone call that's recorded. So, and to give you an example, we have a high-profile inmate, Warren Jeffs. Y'all are familiar with. He was the one in San Angelo a few years ago. They had the cult around San Angelo. They had the cult. He's in prison. There was an issue with an investigation with him where they were wanting to know if he spoke about another issue. Within 15 minutes, we found the call. Looking through 4 months of phone calls, we found a very specific call that gave us the information that we needed. After the New Orleans shooting, looking to see is there any connection to anyone inside our prison to that individual or that individual's family. We found an individual in the prison, in one of our prisons, who had talked to a family member. Nothing nefarious was going on, but that conversation was identified in about 10 minutes by using that technology. So it's excellent technology. It's expensive and it costs a lot to keep it as far as doing a lot of inmates, but it is very productive technology because you can say, I want to find out if someone said Brian Collier's a gray-headed short guy and push it in, and it's going to tell you in about 10 minutes who said it and when it was. I don't do that one, I'm sorry, but that's a bad example.
So what percentage of, I guess, the TDCJ is covered by this new technology?
Yes, sir.
What percentage is covered?
That covers right now about 12,000 inmates. We're working with the governor's office, though, to expand that to about 78,000. And we're working on that as we speak.
I would assume that there will be focused more on a more violent
Yes, sir. That would do the maximum security facilities, and that's where, if you look at our incidents, that's where the majority of that is. And that's when we look at our serious gangs that are actually involved in some of the other things outside. That's where we see it. I will say on a lot of the drug activity, it's not necessarily the gangs. It's the player who can make the connections outside. It may be a guy who's second time in prison with a 5-year sentence, but he's got connections that can help bring it in, and he becomes a player in the drug network. But we're seeing less of the gang running the drugs and more of that than we are any other.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Schwartner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director Collier, I wanted to touch base also regarding correctional managed care.
Yes, sir.
Senator Colcourse and I have been kind of chewing on this for a long time, at least back to 2011 when there was a significant budget crunch. But just looking at your budget, your budget's $9.58 billion for the next biennium.
Yes, sir.
Of which $2.219 billion, or 23%, is correctional managed health care.
Yes, sir.
Are my numbers correct on the upcoming
believe so.
budget or thereabouts?
Yes,
Looking, and I would assume that the correctional managed health care is a growing portion of your budget relative to other costs?
Percentage-wise, I believe this year's about 5%, if I'm not mistaken. So I think the request would be about a 5% increase, which has been some years higher, some years lower, but around 5 is pretty average.
So 8 years ago, was it 23% of your budget?
We'll have to check.
Yeah, and that's actually what I was getting to. I'd like you to actually look at that growth of correctional managed health care and over the last 10 years,
Yes, sir.
and try to normalize it to the number of offenders, and then also normalize it to Texas Tech versus UTMB.
Gotcha.
I'd like to know where the growth is.
Yes, sir.
And I know UTMB historically has been 2/3 versus 1/3 for Tech.
sir.
Yeah, I actually pulled up UTMB's budget, and their budget for 24 was $2.7 billion, of which $1.9 billion of their operating income was net sales and service of hospital and clinics. And 1.1 billion of that 1.9 is designated. And so I believe that UTMB receives a significant portion of their operating budget from the state of Texas, not just through support of UTMB, but through correctional managed health care.
Yes, sir.
And I don't know relative from a per offender amount how much more we're paying for offender care at UTMB relative to Tech, or whether or not that's the flip. But I'd like to know that information and see it graphically over the last 10 years, looking at the cost of offender care in
Yes, sir.
Texas.
I'll
Can you
break
do that for me?
I sure can. We'll break it down for you and give you that. One number I can give you, and again, it won't answer that question, but I'll tell you a comparison with other states. The cost of our correctional managed care is about $20 a day. And I would tell you that still remains one of the lowest in the country. Florida's at 21, Michigan at 27. There's some states 24, 25, but as a state entity doing health care, they are still in the lower end of comparing with other states. Not answering your question, but that's just to give you a point of comparison.
And obviously get it to all the members of the
Yes, sir.
committee. I understand that it's a relatively low amount relative to other states, but it strikes me as a
Yes,
growing portion of your budget. I might be wrong about that.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to see how much your CMC is relative to your entire budget. And then again, normalize it relative to the number of inmates, and then normalize it to Tech versus UTMB.
Yes, sir.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Senator Colcourse.
Thank you, Senator Schwartner. It was funny. I was texting my staff to have them pull the last 10 years to watch the growth and to do some of that stuff. We do. And I just texted them. I said, watch this clip. That's what I'm asking for, because they were asking for clarification.
Yes, ma'am.
We'll do our numbers, because what I think is the challenge is that you look at the GAA, and it's one thing. You have to look at the supplemental to add it back in. And those, I know that I've been in the building, both in the House and the Senate, for a long time. There's never been a session where there wasn't a supplemental. So I would like to look at that. That's a good way to look at it. The percentage of increase, the percentage of the budget. And again, I think our challenge with certainly what's going on in Washington, D.C. with the Department of Government efficiency and looking at these things is, Senator Schwartner, you and I were on a subcommittee that I think then Chair Nelson had us do, where we looked at healthcare cost. And what we realized was that in ERS, we pay our health-related institutes above it's an astronomical number. We pay them more to see our employees. I don't know why we pay above the private insurance rate. You and I tried to do something about that. I think we got called to the
I was
principal's
on that
office.
committee too, remember that?
Yeah, it was astonishing what we looked at. And I again want to say, with the Department of
trouble, I
Government Efficiencies and what they're trying to do in Washington, D.C., we're pretty good in Texas, but we can be so much better. So we're going to look at some of those numbers. My question would be on the 340B drug pricing. Does correctional managed healthcare have what they call a PBM? Do they have inside of themselves a PBM?
I won't claim to know that acronym, I'm sorry.
Pharmacy benefit manager.
They certainly may, and I can get you that information, and I'm fully aware of the 340B program and the pricing, but I can find that out.
We had a little audit of them, and I think that it didn't come out until mid-December.
Yes, ma'am.
And again, it hit on some fringes. I think the state auditor's office does a really good job, but it hit on some of the fringes and little money. They really owe us $1.7 million here and all this different stuff. But the sentence that struck me in this, Madam Chair, and to you, Brian, is the structure of UTMB's program contracts with TDCJ and TJJD lacked essential elements to safeguard the state's interest. The contract's design placed all the financial risk on TDCJ and TJJD and did not create any incentive for UTMB to control its major costs. I can take the 30-page report and say it's summed up there. So there's really no incentive to say, wow, are we doing this better? A little bit like we just beat up DPS pretty good on their call, and should we privatize this? Should we be doing call centers? I do think that now that we're at $2.2 billion, they're going to come back with $350 million. I mean, we're talking about $2.5 billion by the time we're sitting in this room 2 years from now. This is real money. So I look forward to working with you. Yes, Madam Chair, there was a day when actually Wyndham had to sit in that seat and justify their cost, and correctional managed healthcare and UTMB had to sit in that seat. And we really did drill down it. We haven't done it in years, Madam Chair.
Well, there's someone here from UTMB, Dr. Murray, as you would like to.
How about we have Dr. Murray come up?
Mm-hmm. They're here. She's here. He's here.
That'd be great.
Well,
you've been around so long that I don't know what to expect your answers to be. Look, you even limp now. Have you been around that long? Look, I've got a broken nose.
And I saw that.
Dr. Murray, do y'all have a PBM within correctional managed healthcare?
We're basically self-managed.
Okay. So on 340B drug pricing, is it transparent enough that I could go in and see that you're really passing along those savings to TDCJ?
Certainly, yeah.
So all of those savings are passed along. It's created in the savings, or I'm not sure we have savings, but
Well, so Owen Murray, Dr. Owen Murray, I'm the Senior Vice President for Correctional Managed Care. So the savings on an annual basis this year will be $105 million. It's kind of averaged about $100 to $105 million, depending on the population. All of those savings, just as I said, it nets out in purchase price, so all of the benefit flows back to the contract. Okay. The only expense, as you were relating to, is we have a 340B committee on campus that oversees the program, and there's some expense from that committee that the contract picks up.
Okay, we'll look into that.
Sure.
I'd like to, the opaqueness of PBMs, which is being talked about finally nationally, thank goodness, is going to be top of the list for Senate Health and Human Services this year. And it will be top in I'm sure, DOJ and everything else. If I look at what y'all are asking for on the hospital Galveston renovation, the $259.2 million, is that adding beds or is that just fixing the place up?
It's refurbishing.
So how many beds do y'all have currently at Hospital Galveston?
We have an operational capacity of about 120. If you counted all the beds, probably closer to 150, but with custody levels, gender issues, infectious precautions, we have an operational capacity of around 120.
So no new beds on 259 million, 260 million.
No.
Okay. Mr. Collier, you were saying that there's a capacity issue. I would ask either one of y'all, way back in the day when we were, I think, interested in, the numbers were much smaller and interested in saving money, we used to have units that had health care on them, so that, are we still doing that?
You still do. And actually, one of the efforts that UTMB has done in the last 12 months is actually emergency care, the regional medical facilities. So every unit has a clinic, a medical clinic that's staffed. Some are staffed 24 hours, some are 12, some are 8. But you have medical staff at the unit level, but then you also have a regional medical facility at more than one location where, let's say in Huntsville, Texas, if you had an inmate at the Ellis unit that needs his emergency care, he can go to the Estelle unit and see an ER doctor in the emergency room at the Estelle unit rather than go off-site. So they do have that, and Owen can clarify a little bit better.
Yeah, and the travel to Galveston, I mean, Texas Tech is a very small portion of the correctional managed health care system, which I do think it warrants us looking at what we're paying in those rates versus what we're paying in the rates for UTMB. Does everyone that has a surgery go all the way to Galveston?
For certain surgeries, yes. One thing I would say you've done, and I was remiss in not mentioning this, so about 3 years ago, we worked with the universities to try to reduce inmate transportation for medical purposes. And our goal was to cut it in half. We were doing 2,000 inmate moves a day. About 1,200 of them at the time of the Lopez escape were done for medical purposes. We worked with the universities. You helped us with funding on things like mobile MRIs and lots of other things. And now those numbers are probably 600 to 700 a day versus 1,200 a day. So they've done a great job in reducing off-site. Some of the surgeries, though, still have to go to Galveston, but a lot of that outpatient can be done at the unit level. Doctors are traveling up to Gatesville, Texas, and doing outpatient visits. Specialists are weekly. So rather than send those ladies to Galveston like we used to, there's staff coming there. Optometry is being done at units. MRIs are being done at units. Things that used to go off-site, we're able to do more of that on unit. So we have reduced that transportation, which is a risk, public safety risk.
And you and I talked about that after
Yes,
the
ma'am.
tragedy that happened in East Texas.
Yes, ma'am.
So the question is, of 600 or 700 movements a day, reduced from 1,200. I mean, like that's incredible when you really look at the complexity of moving offenders around like that. Are those numbers reflected in what UTMB is charging us, or are those borne in TDCJ's budget? Because it's a cost to move.
The cost is one that we have within our just operation budget. So the moving cost, the buses, the transportation staff, the thing that do that is just within TDCJ's budget.
Yeah.
And when we have to go off-site to a hospital, we send 3 officers. That's an off-site cost that is just us having to staff that.
So if you really look at what we're, last session, Madam Chair, I think in the GAA that was signed by the governor, it was $1.8 billion. They're going to request $342 in the supplemental, so $2.142 is what I get on that. That is minus. I mean, that's not really a reflection of the real number because of all the movements and different things.
Yes, ma'am.
So when we talk about this, it's really more than 23% of the budget. You're edging toward probably a quarter of the budget. And so I would just say that healthcare is going to potentially have some modifications, hopefully, in this nation. We're the most developed country in the world. We spend more money on healthcare than any nation in the world. No one argues those 2 points. And by most metrics, we rank 60th on the world stage in our outcomes. And so hopefully with a new administration, we're going to see some major changes, and I'd like that to filter down. My last question would be,
Yes, ma'am.
do we contract with anybody else when the LBB says, oh, there's a cascading effect because of the 120 operational beds in Galveston, of which we're about to spend the better part, $260 million. We're not going to have any more beds. So we're going to still cascade out to more expensive forms of health care, as said by the LBB. Can you prove that up? Is it more expensive? And how many are cascading, the word was, out into the private health world?
So any given day, right today, you probably have 70 to 75 inmates that are off-site in a local ER or a local hospital because of an emergency procedure. We have a small number of beds in Huntsville at the hospital in Huntsville where we have inmates and we co-locate staff there so we don't have to have it staffed as heavy, but we have inmates that are there, a small number of beds that we contract for there. Those beds typically are more expensive than us keeping them on a unit or running them to Galveston for depending on the services.
Well, yeah, obviously, with I represented Huntsville for a long time. It's a long way from Galveston, and I'd like to have those numbers
Yes, ma'am.
included with Senator Shortner's numbers, and then finally to say that the question being, is that reflected in the $2.142 billion that we'll end up paying this biennium?
I think it would be because that contract's
So
with UTMB.
UTMB has to pay the local hospital.
Yes, ma'am.
So it's a part of their contract.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
Senator Shortner, your light was still on.
Yes, I had just one
It's the
follow-up
same
question.
issue, yeah, and then I'll get to you,
Same
Senator
issue.
Alvarado.
Dr. Grant,
Finish this.
what is the amount of money that is received by UTMB on a yearly basis in 24 for CMC?
424
424
or FY24.
for FY24.
Can you speak
Speak
to the
up.
microphone?
For FY24, around 7, 8. Hold on, probably around 800 million.
8 million. And the operating budget at UTMB itself was 2.7 billion, according to the internet official website. So, is that designated? Is that what they call designated income in the? Do you know?
That I don't know.
Okay. So it's a significant portion of the operating budget at UTMB. It was 800 million out of 2.7 billion.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. And what percentage of the inmates or the population do y'all serve? What numbers? Do you have a number total?
It's about typically it's about 80-20 split between
80-20
ourselves
versus
and
Tech.
Texas Tech.
Yeah. Okay. 80-20. Alrighty. Well, I think the data will be very illustrative. Oh, do y'all own Hospital Galveston, or does the state own it?
I believe we own it.
UTMB owns it.
Correct.
Okay, so this 260 is a renovation of, and is it going to be less beds? Because I trained there. I spent 9 years on Hospital Galveston in the area, and the beds are like four people to the room, if I remember correctly. Are y'all going to like diminish the number of beds?
No, from when you were there, things have changed.
Okay.
Obviously, from a safety perspective, we used to have 3 beds in a room.
Yeah.
And that was not safe for the nursing staff because a nurse would have to turn
Yeah,
back
yeah,
or
yeah.
his
I remember,
back.
yeah.
So as I said, or a physician as well. And so from that standpoint, we've consolidated down the number of beds to 2 in a room.
So your supplemental is 260 for Hospital Galveston. Is that 104.7? Is that the supplemental for UTMB care of the supplemental amount? Because y'all want 11.3 for Tech. Is it 105 that were
Yes.
for the supplemental amount for? We'll get to the.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you very much for the information.
Thank you. Senator Alvarado, do you have a question of Dr. Murray, or are you just on another subject?
No, not Dr. Murray.
Okay, Dr. Murray, thank you very much.
Hopefully this is a simple, simple one. What is the protocol and the staffing that goes on when an inmate leaves and they're transported on a bus back to their home city or to wherever they're assigned? And I'm asking that, and I think your folks know about this, is the Greyhound bus station in my district that has caused a lot of issues in the East End.
Yes, ma'am. So when inmates, so obviously family picks up a lot of our inmates from the unit where they're being released, but we do have inmates that are going to other destinations. We provide a bus ticket and then as well as release gate money for them when they leave the system. We also have staff that help them in Huntsville, make sure they catch a bus. We have parole officers that go to the bus station in Houston, in your district, where we actually make sure that they catch the right bus they're supposed to go to and don't linger or loiter in the bus station. So we make sure that they make their connections. We did it when it was downtown as well.
Right.
But we've done that for several years where we have staff that go there to try to help sure that they make the bus. And then we know when they should arrive in their destination. And depending on the type inmate, we may have staff there waiting to see them when they get at that destination.
And do you have enough officers, enough resources to handle those inmates when they arrive at the destination?
Yes, ma'am. And in your base, because it's parole officers, they included a pay increase for those staff who really work hard at doing that. But yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Senator Nichols.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I've been interesting sitting here on the sidelines watching this. But I just did some quick math. You're talking about functionally 120 beds. You're going to rebuild it, and it's going for $260 million. That's over $2 million a bed. $2 million a bed. We've been building brand new mental health facilities for less than that.
That's a maximum security mental health hospital.
If
Maximum security.
yes, sir. If I could help Senator Nichols, I'll get you the information on the breakdown. But it's roofing, it's elevators, it's security equipment,
Well,
locks and
yeah, you
gates,
can-
and things like that.
It's a brand new hospital. That's not a renovation.
It would be upgrading quite a bit of it. Yes, sir.
It's over $2 million. Why don't we just build our own hospital?
Yes, sir.
Why do we want to build UT's hospital for them?
Understand.
Doesn't seem to be a lot of love for that right now. I think we'll have to explore this topic some more. But for now, you're done. Thank you very much for being here. You do a great job.
Thank you.
Ryan.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much for your service.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to move on to Juvenile Justice Department. And LBB will ask you to present another population projection on Mr. Hin. I don't know his name. Hin? Yeah. LBB presentation on the budget will be by Ann Fine, and then the agency executive director is Chandra Carter, Emily Anderson, deputy executive director of support operations and finance. We're doing juvenile justice. Yes? Oh, yeah, sorry, did I skip? I skipped somebody. I am so sorry. Why don't, everybody, okay, stand down. Hopefully, yeah, this shouldn't take too long. All right.